Finally, I'm going to make my own type of object. So here I made a student class, which we'll look at in a minute, but it defines a type of object called a student. And let's open up the tester. And in the tester, I have this big, huge comment up top, and it says a student has the following fields: string name, int test1, int test2, and int test3. So every student object that I make has 4 fields associated with it: a name and 3 tests. When I made string objects, strings are a simpler type of object. They just have a bunch of letters, like it could be a name. A string is just that, nothing else. So here are a bunch of methods that I can run on a student object that I create. These first 2 methods happen to also be named student. I shouldn't say happen to be. There's special meaning. When you have a method that has the same name as the class, they are methods which are called constructor methods. They tell you how to make one of these objects. So I can make a student object by passing it just a string, which is presumably the name of the student, or I can make a student object passing it a name, a string name, and 3 test scores. Remember, students have a name and 3 test grades associated with them. And then I have these other methods to set the tests: set test1, set test2, set test3, and a method to calculate the average, and finally a method which will compare 2 students to each other and decide if they are equal to each other or not. Just like, on a string, you can make a new string and decide if 2 strings are equal to each other. String 1 dot equals string 2. You can do the same exact thing in my student class, but I made up my own equals method. Anyway, so let's take a look at the code. Here I'm actually creating a new student. Student S1 equals new student Bob. Hey, I made a new student. That's how you make a new student. And now I'm setting 3 test grades. S1 dot set test1 to 90. So Bob, I guess, got a 90 on the first test. He got a 96 and then a 79 on the third test. So the way you run methods on this new object S1 that I created is you use this thing called dot notation, where you just say the name of the object dot the name of the method. This should be very familiar. This is exactly what you did with strings. If I created a new string called name and I wanted to get its length, I could say name.length. Or substring, I could say name.substring. So here my object is S1 and I'm running methods on that object. In this case, the methods are methods that I made up myself, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. Here I created another new student. This time I'm running this method, the second student constructor method, which takes a name and 3 test scores, and then I'm printing out whether student S1 is equal to student S2, and you know that it'll say true if they have the same average, false if they don't. So let me just run this, and so you can get a quick peek at it. Of course, false. the two students are not equal to each other. I'm just going to add a couple more things. What if I actually wanted to print out what student 1 was? So let me actually just get rid of the student 2 for the moment. I'm just going to print out student S1, system.out.println S1. You can do this with strings, of course. You can just make a string called name and then put name in a print statement, and it prints out name. Will it do the same thing for objects you create on your own? You bet it will. All right, so I'll compile this, give it a run, and you can see that it prints out the name of my student, Bob, and his test grades. So hopefully you're seeing the similarity between this and string objects. This is just a type of object that you made up on your own, and I can put the name of that object in a print statement, and it'll print out information about that object. So let's take a quick look at the class that defines the object, my student class. Here it is. Open it up real quick. And the first thing I have, the name of the class is called student. I define the fields that are associated with students. Now notice these are not within any method. I define these up top. They're outside. These are global variables. They define the fields that are associated with every student. So every student has a name and 3 tests, as we already discussed. These instance fields, these are called instance fields because every instance of a student has these fields associated with them. These are private. Private means that I cannot access these directly from classes outside of the student class, but every method can access these fields. Underneath it, I made, this is the constructor. I called this the default constructor, which is not really true. This is so ignore that. This is a constructor. It tells me how to make a student. If I remember, I said new student and I passed it a name, and then it set the test scores to 0. So this is one way to make a new student. Here was the other way. You remember I had 2 ways of making a student, one where I just passed it a name and one where I passed it a name and 3 test scores. This is that constructor. And then the other methods are very simple, really. Here's how I set test 1, set test 2, set test 3, and so forth. Notice the input is an integer, t, and I'm setting the instance field test1 to t. Remember, test1 is one of these global variables way up here on the top, test 1, test 2, test 3. So all I'm doing is setting them to some input parameter. Test 1, test 2, test 3. Average does just what you would expect. It returns the average of the 3 tests, add them up, divide by 3. ToString. Now I didn't mention that there was a method called ToString. That's because ToString is a special method which Java looks for by default. If you put the name of an object in a print statement, Java will automatically look for and run a method called ToString. So if you name a method ToString, you don't have to say, like in the tester, I didn't have to say s1.toString. All I had to say was system.out.println s1, and it ran the ToString method. This is a special method name. And when it ran it, it said the name was Bob, its test scores, whatever his test scores were. Finally, I have this equals method, which determines if 2 students have the same average. Remember, I said s1.equals s2. So I'm running the equals method on some particular student, and I'm comparing it to another student which I'm passing in. That's why the name of the other student I'm passing in is called other. So I'm saying other.average. It's comparing these 2 average, and it's returning true or false. So hopefully this was a good recap of creating a class which defines your own type of object. And hopefully that's enough to get you going on the next project. All right.